Assen once again has delivered an absolute cracker. Some brilliant action this last weekend for MotoGP. So let's get straight into it with some of the talking points and what I think of what happened in the weekend. Not just as a racing weekend spectacle, but indeed for the championship race as well. So in terms of the sprint race, which took place on Saturday, it was a 1-2 for Aprilia, but not the factory squad. Indeed, it was the Trackhouse side taking a 1-2. Raul Fernandez took the win, his second sprint win of the season, ahead of his teammate, who's performing really well at the moment, Ai Ogura. And then Digi got P3, so a Ducati on the podium with the two factory Aprilias behind. So Marco Bezzecchi was P4, Jorge Martin P5, despite qualifying in pole position. It was fairly clear early on this weekend that Ducati weren't on the leader's pace. They weren't as quick as Aprilia, although Digi was in there in the sprint, so you can prefer that argument if you like. But Marc Marquez and Pecco Bagnaia on the factory Ducatis weren't quite as strong. Marc Marquez picked up a P6 in the sprint, Pecco Bagnaia P7, and then it was two KTMs taking the last 2 points finishes, and Aia Bastianini on the Tech Free bike in P8, and Pedro Acosta scoring a single point in P9. And then the main race on Sunday delivered a second Trackhouse 1-2, but this time it was in reverse, and that was a really special win. It was Ai Ogura's first win in the Premier Class, and for the country of Japan, it was his first win in the Premier Class for 22 years since Makoto Tamada took his second and final win in the Premier Class in his home race at Motegi all the way back in 2004. And another stat which is really cool is that pole in Brno for Ogura and a P2 in qualifying here in Assen make it back-to-back front rows for a Japanese rider for the first time since Toru Ukawa in 2002. Apologies if I've pronounced any of those names incorrectly. But 2 1-2s for the Trackhouse Aprilia team. Not so pretty for the factory side, however. And it is Marco Bezzecchi who takes a lot of the headlines after this weekend. And really in the last few weekends for how his surefire championship chances have started to crumble for him a little bit as we go towards the mid-season point at the Sachsenring next time out. So Bez suffered a really nasty crash early on in the race. I felt that crash was just trying to keep up with Marc Marquez. Took a little bit too much pace, I think, into the penultimate corner. Well, if you class the chicane as one corner complex, if you will. That crash was a nasty one. He tumbled over a few times and he required hospital treatment for that. And now Bez has had 3 non-finishes in a row on Sunday. So a DNF here in Assen. Of course, it was did not start back in Brno after he got suspended for the race after striking a marshal after going out of the race, crashing out of the sprint race on Saturday. And then at the Balaton he didn't finish as well after that bowling ball skittle effect from Jorge Martin at the first corner at the Balaton. That was a pretty nasty accident. Fortunately, all got out of that all okay. But for the first time, I think this season, Marco Bezzecchi relinquishes the lead of the championship to his teammate Jorge Martin. And Martin's only took 1 win on a Sunday this year compared to Marco Bezzecchi's 4. And when you look, because we are 10 races in now, if you look at the first 5 races compared to the second 5 races, Aprilia took the first 3 race wins this year. I took 4 of the first 5. 5 podiums in the first 5 for Marco Bezzecchi. His next 2 finishes after that P1 being on the podium. I think it is bonkers that it has come to this, how Marco Bezzecchi's season has unravelled so quickly. The Sundays don't tell the full story for Bezzecchi, I don't think. In the sprint so far this year, Bez has struggled. I remember that he crashed back in Texas. Here this weekend in the sprint, he was, did I say he was in P4? I think he was in P4. Just not quite at it in the sprint races. And we saw back a couple of years ago when Jorge Martin won the championship ahead of Pecco Bagnaia, that those 12 points on a Saturday over 20-odd rounds now round up to at least 200-odd points to play for. So Saturdays are still really important in a title charge and a title chase, which is going to be so close. But I spoke last weekend about how the title chase is closing up. I think I said that there were 6 or 7 riders within 50 points. Now, after this weekend, there are only 5 within 50 points of the championship leader, which is now Jorge Martin. But that race winner from this weekend, Ai Ogura, is seriously becoming a title challenger. There's 4 riders now within 25 points. Ai Ogura is that 4th rider, 25 points behind Jorge Martin at the top of the championship, with Marc Marquez outside of that, just outside of that 1 race striking distance number, if you will, being 37 behind. Of course, that's what you can score in a full weekend. Marc Marquez sits 40 20 behind. The dark horse in all this, Pedro Acosta on the KTM. He lost some big points this weekend because he retired in the race with what was thought to be another bike breakdown. Acosta back in Spain, famously in Catalonia, his bike broke down. That led to the horrific incident for Alex Marquez. A word for him, by the way, unbelievably coming back last weekend in Brno and raced really well here in Assen to finish, I think, just behind that Marc Marquez group. He was in with that group, wasn't he? Has done remarkably well to come back from that injury, which I would have said would have kept him out until at least after the summer break. But it was points lost for Pedro Acosta. He retired with actual carpal tunnel syndrome. That's why he was flexing his fingers, if you will, really struggling with his fingers. It was carpal tunnel rather than a bike that had given up the ghost on him. But to focus back on those Trackhouse riders and Raul Fernandez, who I've been a little bit critical of early on so far this year, but it was Raul's first Sunday podium since the first race all the way back in Thailand. And despite a sprint win here, it was his second of the season. He held off Jorge Martin back in Mugello. He is still 30 points behind his teammate, 55 points behind the championship leader, thanks to Ai Ogura's brilliant form, first and second on the last two Sundays. Yeah, of course it is, because Marc Marquez won the last race, didn't he, in Brno? As I said earlier, to think that Aprilia took 4 of the 5 first race wins this year, 3 of those being 1-2s, to only 1 race win on a Sunday since then, in the 5 racing since then, and on that occasion it was a 1-2. That has thrown this title race wide open, and that as a neutral, I am a Marc Marquez fan at heart. I think Marc and then Jorge Martin are my 2 favourites of the title challengers. But being more of a neutral, it's great to see Ai Ogura up there, Raul Fernandez. For me, the more riders that are up there, the more exciting it is, the more unpredictable it is. We'll come on in a minute to what I predicted for this weekend and how I got that emphatically wrong. And that just shows how unpredictable MotoGP is at the moment. What we did see, though, in the last few rounds is Marc Marquez's brilliance in the Balaton and then in Brno. Of course, that had that part to play. But the last few weekends, particularly for Trackhouse, 2 1-2s here. In the sprint and in the main race. I think it shows if Ai Ogura and Raul Fernandez get some good qualifying results, they're seriously in the battle. That is something that Ai Ogura has really struggled with. Has good light race pace. There's a couple of riders we can say the same about, and Anaya Bastianini being another one who has really good light race pace, but because of how good the pace is in MotoGP, if you're behind that lead group fairly early on, you're going to have some really good pace to close them. That's exactly what Ai Ogura did here. He closed up to Jorge Martin and Raul Fernandez. He was clearly the fastest rider on the day, but I'm not sure that Ai Ogura will have that sort of advantage later on in the season. And that guy, Ai Ogura, is the big gainer, I think, in the last few rounds. In the 2 rounds prior to what we've seen previously, so Brno and Assen, he scored 2 4th places. That just means he's propelled his way up the championship compared to Bez, who had scored nothing on the last 3 Sundays. And then Digi really continues his consistency on a Ducati bike this year, which isn't really well known. It's an unknown quantity. Marc Marquez is getting the most out of it. Pecco Bagnaia, once again, is a little bit inconsistent on that bike. It is Digi that has been really consistent. He's the only rider in the top 10 of the standings, I believe, to have finished every race so far on a Sunday. The guy behind that, in 11th place, Luca Marini, I think, has finished every race so far on a Sunday. But Digi has been really consistent. All of his race finishes on a Sunday within the top 6, with the exception of 1 race in Hungary in P12. And I think that was the race where he was caught up in that drama, that scuffle at the start. So no doubt, without that, Digi might well have finished in the top 10 there as well. So to embarrass myself, let's look back at the prediction I made for this weekend in Assen. And I just went haphazardly, if you will, with a repeat of last year's results. So that was Marc Marquez winning the race, Bez in P2, and Bagnaia in P3. Well, 2 of those didn't finish. Bez crashed out. We didn't talk about Pecco Bagnaia much. He had a technical issue on Sunday. And Marc Marquez was down in P7. So what do I know? Well, we head to the Sachsenring next, which is a Marc Marquez powerhouse. He won the race last year. It was a Marc Marquez, Alex Marquez 1-2, and Pecco was behind in P3. We had Fabio Quartararo finishing P4 as well there last year. But this is the last race in the Sachsenring before the mid-season break. We have a 4-week summer break after the Sachsenring. Such is customary really for the last few seasons. I don't know how far back that's gone, but as far as I can remember, the Sachsenring has been the last before that mid-season break. We then have the British Grand Prix around about the start of August. That's a change from being in May last year, which was a Grand Prix I went to. Normally that race, I think, is about the end of August, but it's taking its place in the beginning of August this time. And then we have a 3-week break after that before the Grand Prix of Aragon. So in summary, we only get 3 Grand Prix rounds over the next 2 months. But the closed season gives us 9 rounds in a period of just over the 2 months following that. So the next 2 months are quiet for MotoGP, but after that it really gets going in the closed season. Interestingly, last year we also saw a Bezzecchi non-finish on Sunday in the Sachsenring. Wonder if that's an omen of things to come as well. I'm going to go with Marc Marquez, though, to win again in Germany. I can't look past Marc Marquez winning the race in Sachsenring. I think, like at the Balaton, the only thing that can beat Marc Marquez at the Sachsenring is himself. Such is his prowess at those left-hand corners, really. I'm going to go with Bez recovering this weekend. I can't see him having another bad weekend, but I think he'll recover to P3. And I'm going to fancy Digi to finish just in behind Marc Marquez. I was going to say Ai Ogura. I reckon Trackhouse might have a weekend off this weekend. Again, just my prediction, just my random prediction. The brilliant thing with MotoGP at the moment is that you can go for 8 or 9 riders to take that podium. I mean, even Pecco Bagnaia could well win the race, but that is the beauty of MotoGP at the moment. And maybe Fabio Quartararo can do something special, but P4, I think that's a little bit out of his wheelhouse, if you will, at the moment. Now that I think we've got the Concord agreement, if you will, signed, we've seen a lot of driver announcements, or should I say rider announcements, in the last few weeks. But I'm not going to cover those here. I'm going to cover those probably in a mid-season show, given, as I've said before, there won't be much MotoGP action for a few weeks after the German Grand Prix. But there you go. That's my roundup of the last round of the MotoGP circus. The Dutch TT always delivers a great race, and once again did so this year. If you've enjoyed this roundup, please do leave a like down below, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel. If you turn notifications on, you won't miss a single video. I'll be back in a couple of weeks' time for the review of the Sachsenring race, and then hopefully there'll be a video in the mid-season break talking about what I think of some of these driver moves. Rider moves, for goodness sake. As a Formula 1 fan for years, I can't get past that. It's riders, not drivers. Oh well, we keep all the mistakes in round here. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.